Welcome to another edition of the College Amazed College Conversations. Here to talk with Dr. Mark Salisbury from TuitionFit about some award letters and some of the work that he's doing to increase transparency. And I don't know if you said this, Mark, or if I made this up, but seeking to democratize kind of financial aid information from colleges. So certainly super happy to have him here and to share a little bit about what he does and how TuitionFit can maybe help school counselors help students and families. So again, for those that are maybe new here, I'm Tim Poynton, Associate Professor at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. We've got Rich LePan. You want to?
Welcome. We're very excited. Mark, thanks for joining us today. I'm thrilled. I always start off, I think, this part by saying something about, a parent of a couple of daughters that have gone to college, and I can that great transition moment where I could honestly say, I'll incur no new college debt in my lifetime, and so very pleased.
And to that, I would say it's never too old to learn. But so thank you. Thank you, Rich. Amanda is not here today. She is at a conference, but she will be back with us next week when we'll have Julie Shields-Ratina from MIFA, who will be joining us to talk a little bit more about financial aid stuff. In particular, she's going to focus on the FAFSA and how we can help students and families complete the FAFSA. But this week, we've got Mark. So, Mark, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? About TuitionFit and why you started it.
Sure. So yeah, great to see you, meet you, Rich, for the first time, and see you again, Tim. And just thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. I think the work that you guys do is super important and critical, and I know it's already been valuable for all kinds of students and families and counselors. I spent 25 years working in colleges and universities. I started out in college athletics and eventually moved over into admissions and financial aid, sort of as a function of athletics. You're always thinking about that stuff as well, but eventually stopped coaching, spent some time in admissions, and then went back to do a Ph.D. studying how higher education works. Spend 10 years living it, and then kind of go, this is really interesting, but how in the heck does this thing actually work? And when it doesn't work, why? So I did a PhD studying college students, college student outcomes, college access, differences in access between different types of students. And then spent 8 years as a director of institutional research and assessment at a small college in the Midwest. That is the nerdiest job title on campus. I think it's pretty fair to say, but eyeball deep in all the data. So every bit of data that gets collected by colleges and then reported, whether it's to the federal government or to US News or anybody in between, that was me. And over that whole career, college pricing's just been always at the forefront of almost every conversation, because the public's just so frustrated with not being able to shop by price. Essentially, just say, like, which colleges are going to fit my price range? I just want to know that. Like, why is that so hard? And colleges just don't have that approach. They don't think about it that way. And they have developed this high price, high discount model. That's the term that sort of folks use under the hood. And it's this idea that the sticker price is going to be over the moon. Doesn't matter, but somehow the sticker price will attract people to your school because you'll think it's really, really great because it's super expensive. And then after we get you into the funnel, as it were, then we'll give you a bunch of scholarships and discounts and whatever it takes. Maybe it's based on your financial need. Maybe it's based on some other academic bona fides. And then we'll get you your actual price. And the public is just so frustrated with this, because in what other situation would you eliminate a bunch of choices and pick a couple of things without knowing whether it's going to be a price tag that works for you or not? And we know all the sort of collateral damage of this, the dropout rates, the proportion of those students that drop out because of financial issues, the student debt problem. This is not particular news. And so in 2018, I started kicking around the ideas of how could we create one data set that has the actual prices, that's verifiable, it's not just sort of guesstimates, and that it's secure so that everybody's personal information is protected. And it basically came down to, well, the only place where those prices exist is publicly available, is in the financial aid offer letters that students get when they get accepted to a school, usually a couple of weeks after when they get accepted. So if you know a little bit about how college pricing works, you can put all those prices together in a way that essentially makes it possible for the public to see that. So we just started crowdsourcing the data, and a couple of years later, tens of thousands of prices in the data set, and people are using TuitionFit to sort of solve the just very basic problem, like which schools fit my price range.
Yeah, that's great. And I know we've talked on this podcast before about the challenge with that, about how the sticker prices, as we like to call it, the listed price is not the price that people often pay. And I know we'll talk about the net price here a little bit later, but there are ways to estimate the net price, but that's still not going to be as the same as an actual award letter, right?
No.
So that's one better. So this is, I mean, certainly appreciate the as somebody as kind of a career counselor, school counselor, and a career counselor, like you left what most people would consider to be a stable job to start your own company. So God bless you.
Yeah, people make silly decisions sometimes, but it really was a sort of, everybody knows we need this, but nobody's really motivated enough to do anything about it. And there's a lot of folks making a lot of money off of the dysfunction in this marketplace. There's billions of dollars that are spent in the enrollment management world. Colleges pay these companies 6 and 7 figures a year, and their goal is to get people to come and pay for their school and pay the most that they can possibly get them to pay, right?
Marketing and branding.
Yeah.
Say that, yes. In addition to all of the algorithms that they use and predicting which students would be like, and which price would be likely the one that student would sort of agree to, right? Mm-hmm. Like, what's the highest possible price I can get you to pay to enroll at my school, right? The public, on the other hand, doesn't want to pay the highest possible price. They want to pay at least a fair price and maybe get even a good value. Mm-hmm. But they can't get that information. And so then there's a whole other industry that's developed, that's, you pay people for college guidance, and you pay people for test prep because you think that if you get a better test score, you'll somehow be able to get into a better school or get a better price. Or there's this whole industry that's sort of come up that the public's paying for as well, to try to circumvent or just get a little bit of a more even playing field, given how much the colleges are paying. Mm-hmm. And of course, all the money that the colleges are paying is coming from where? Well, it's coming from tuition. So the public is paying for both sides of this marketplace, right, to be what it is. Mm-hmm. And it just struck me like nobody's trying to honestly solve the marketplace as a entity that, when it's more efficient, it's a environment of abundance instead of limited resources, and that more people will go even if those by individual are paying less. Mm-hmm. So
wouldn't that be good?
Wouldn't that be good? And yeah. I was just crazy enough to try it.
Yeah,
that really is the only answer.
So thank you for that, and again, thank you for taking the risk and starting this. So as you know, the podcast audience is school counselors, is who we're really targeting this towards. So I guess, what do you want counselors to know about TuitionFit, and how do you think it can help counselors? And I know you mentioned just a few minutes ago that you've got some slides that you'd like to share. So
yeah,
transition to you.
Yeah, why don't we jump up and I'll show those things. I don't know if Why don't you just let me know if you're seeing my screen now?
Yes.
Yep.
So TuitionFit really is crowdsourcing at its core. And we all know crowdsourcing from different experiences. If you use Yelp and you want a restaurant reviews, well, that's crowdsourcing reviews into one place so you can decide, people think this is a good restaurant, or definitely don't go there, right? So there's all these award letters that are sent out by the millions every year to students all over the country. And in those award letters, if you know how to decode them, which is a sort of different kettle of fish, you can see what the actual price is that they're charging students. If you ask the student, in addition to the award letter, you ask them, what is your EFC, the expected family contribution that came from filling out the FAFSA? And what's your unweighted high school GPA and or your test score? Then we now know that that college gives that price to that kind of student. So once you aggregate this stuff, once you make it possible for people to share this stuff to one central location in the cloud, us, then first thing we do is we anonymize the award letters so everybody's information is protected. And the user actually gets to see the anonymized version before it goes into the system and approve that they're comfortable with that anonymization. And then we organize the prices in the same way that colleges organize their prices so that all the students with a similar EFC and a similar academic profile are all in the same bucket. Then people can use this to sort of create this giant Kelley Blue Book of college pricing. So when a student shares their award letters, then as a quid pro quo for sharing those letters, then that student gets to see all of the offers in our system from this year as well as the last couple of years, from students who, like them. So similar need and merit criteria from whatever colleges those students uploaded those letters from. So you could typically now you'll upload an award letter and you'll see hundreds, sometimes thousands of offers shared by similar students. And then you have the ability to, one, just see if the price you've been offered is a fair price and how it compares to what else is out there. Or two, use this information at a different part of the process. So for high school juniors and families, this allows them to build a college list that fits their financial requirements, right? They say, well, we've got X number of dollars to spend on college. Where should we look? We can do that and make that really simple for them. Helps them set some realistic expectations and to dispel that unaffordability myth. I know lots of folks in high schools have students that just are sure they can't afford college. And those folks aren't convinced just by the promise that there's lots of scholarship money. But when you can show them, no, here's a student like you, got this price. Oh, wow, that's totally within my price range. And for zero EFC kids, when we show them that here's a bunch of schools that are actually sending students a check because they're building their aid off of the cost of attendance instead of the direct costs, tuition, fees, room and board, we dispel the unaffordability myth all the time. And then what that does is it just gives the students the confidence to proceed, the confidence that they can be relatively sure, if not completely sure, that they're not going to get an 11th hour surprise of a price tag that's way more than they were expecting. And then for seniors and their families, it's put your own offer in some context, just like when you use Kelley Blue Book, you're just trying to see if the offer you got from the dealership down the street's a fair one or not. You have more realistic expectations if you want to appeal. And if you had to, now you see what other schools' prices are out there. And today we know most colleges are taking applications all the way to September because they have to. So a student could look to another school that it might seem late in the process, but that school is still taking applications. Of course they are. So that's how TuitionFit works. And for counselors, this is where it gets kind of at least fun for me. We have this thing called the TuitionFit Collaborative, where a school joins and it's free to join. The students and families get free access to TuitionFit. The counselors get to search the data set for free. The counselors get a dashboard that allows them to link to their students to see what their students see. And then we have this wonderful thing that is FERPA compliant. And I say wonderful because I didn't even realize until a couple of years into this project the degree to which colleges or high schools are oftentimes really trying to aggregate and collect all the scholarship and financial aid totals that their senior class gets so that they can announce it at graduation, so that they can announce it in their community, and it's sort of a feel-good number. And counselors are oftentimes stuck with the assignment of gathering that information. And a lot of counselors are uncomfortable with it because they feel like they're seeing stuff they shouldn't see. Using TuitionFit makes that whole process FERPA compliant. And so college, you can use this thing for free as a high school, and it saves you a ton of time. And the only thing that the school needs to do is just use TuitionFit. So it's pretty simple. Then I talked about these other data that you get, and this is where I find this thing to be so important. Yeah, you can get to these big top level numbers, but underneath that, it's super important as a counselor that you really make sure that all your students are finding the schools and looking at the schools that really are schools they can afford to go to and graduate from. And so this is just an example of some data that we pulled together as an example of what can happen, what often happens. These are the actual prices across different types of students. You see across the top is the different GPA groups, and then vertically is the different financial need groups. Pell eligible, 2 other brackets, and then folks that are above 50K in EFC probably can pay most of the cost, if not the whole thing, to go to college. But look here, like these students, they're Pell eligible in these 2 categories. They're still being asked to pay an awful lot of money on top of the money they get from Pell and on top of the federal loan money. Well, these kids' likelihood of finishing takes a hit because they're going to have to borrow a ton. I mean, they're already going to borrow the federal amount of $30,000, but this is essentially another 40 grand on top of that.
Mm-hmm. If they graduate in 4 years, right? And
if they graduate in 4 years, a great point, Rich. So why is this? When we know from our data at TuitionFit that virtually every student can pay as little as $5,000 a year to go to college, or as much as $75,000 to go to college. So what's happening here? Well, what's happening is likelihood is those kids are swooning over places and people are trying to tell them that, you can go to college, you should pursue your dreams. And so they kind of swoon over the schools that look great, but then it ultimately charge them more. And because they've eliminated the schools that are actually the better fit financially early, they end up in this situation, which is not good for them graduating. And you think the same thing is true, as you move down, and you really see this in this donut hole. And folks who work with students a lot and understand the pricing stuff see this all the time. The students that don't qualify for Pell, but clearly are not in a position to pay a substantial amount of money for college. And look at across the board here, so many of these students are ending up with average prices that are far beyond what they can afford. And it's not like the schools that they can afford aren't out there. Like, it's not like there's no options for them. It's the choices that they made and the guidance that they did or didn't get. So this is the kind of stuff that you can take directly back to your guidance work to help students understand that the list of colleges they start with really can have an impact on what their ultimate price would be. And if price matters for a family, price matters for your students, this is one way to be able to improve that work. Yeah. So that's what TuitionFit does. And we can also break the data down by race and ethnicity or first generation status. But the point here is TuitionFit allows schools and school counselors to be far more able to address that financial fit part of the equation without dealing with, without feeling like they have to be FAFSA completion experts, right? And that's and then ask questions about that family's finances that are way beyond what the counselor feels comfortable with. we can cut to the chase and give them information that helps them pretty quickly help their students ensure that they find the financial fit that they need.
Mm.
Yeah, that's great. And it's so if I'm a counselor and I want to sign up, is it easy to find on tuitionfit.org?
Yeah, the way to sign up for the collaborative is really to connect with me directly. Just send me an email at mark@tuitionfit.org and we'll get you set up.
Great.
Wow. Well, Mark, just let me say real quick, that's really impressive. I mean, and 20 minutes won't do it. We definitely have to have you come back to unpack that. So so tell me if I got this right. So I was looking at that second line of data on your saying. So if you're saying if families making, say, less than 25,000 a year and they aren't eligible for Pell, it looks like, I mean, they're up about 25. They're gonna for a 4-year college degree, there'll be about $100,000 at least
in debt.
And then what's the monthly payment on that going to be? Because that is a thing. Young people trying to start their lives, getting in place.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as folks who are really passionate about education and graduating students into the education field. One of the things that we see here, we're talking about debt coming out of college, depending on how that debt plays out. But you're talking about monthly payments of $500 to $1,000 a month, right?
Yep.
And one of the things that we know is, and there's actually research on this that's pretty interesting, is students pursuing professions in service professions, like in particular teaching and school counseling. There are so many students there are more students that want to pursue that profession than ultimately do. And part of the reason that they don't is because they get into a position down the road in college, or maybe they're lucky enough to get this information before they go to college, but more often than not, they're partway through college. They're pretty interested to very interested in pursuing a profession as a teacher or a counselor. And then somebody helps them do the math and they figure out, I got a $700 debt payment per month when I graduate, and a starting teacher in the area that I live or where I want to live, the salary is I don't know, $35,000 a year. I won't be able to afford to live on that salary with that debt payment.
Right.
So guess what? Teaching's not an option, and I'm going to go into HR, or I'm going to go into some other profession that I can go into and afford to pay off the loan that I got. And that's a horrible set of circumstances for a young person not to be able to pursue their passion. And two, at the beginning of this year, I think we were about 300,000 teachers short nationally. And we have education programs across the country that are shrinking because of dramatic declines in enrollment.
Right.
This is not an accident, right? This is a function of missing the college financial fit equation element of the college search. And if we could fix that for students, we would see far more students ultimately ending up in teaching and in school counseling.
Wow. As well, too, I would think, and I at one point I knew the numbers on this, but the large number of students who have a 4-year college degree who go back to a community college so they can get an occupational certificate, and that is a way into a higher paying career.
Yep. And sometimes they need that, and that's great, right? I mean, how many people in education finish their degree and then pretty soon thereafter do an evening master's program or something like that because that increases their salary? But how often is that the case that the student pursues that sort of after the fact because they've figured out, I need this to be able to afford to live, afford to make the payments on the debt that I've accrued.
Yeah. So do you look at too, do you have information about, because one thing I know as a parent, all colleges are not equal. Even probably selective colleges, if you will, are very different when it comes to giving money, dealing with you about finances. I don't know if you have anything
Well,
about it.
So a couple things. One is pricing is always a function of supply and demand. So you're always going to have the schools that get tons of people interested. They don't have to give out as much aid because they just don't have to, right?
Mhm.
And they might focus on need-based aid and not do any merit aid. But at the end of the day, if a student wants to find a school that fits their price range, you can either do the whole dance or you can just cut to the chase and talk about what's my actual price.
Yeah, that's great. Jim, just we only got a few more minutes, so I just want to be selfish and ask you a very specific question about the letters themselves. And I always find it confusing. I found it confusing as a parent to read those. And we talk a lot about looking closely at it. So, for example, even something like work study money, sometimes it gets included as if all of it goes directly off to tuition. So 2,000, 4,000, whatever. I got to go talk to my daughters because we didn't do it that way. So and if that $2,000 or $4,000 isn't going to tuition, you got to come up with that. So that's an additional amount. I mean, so what do you find when you look at these letters? What kind of concerns do you have?
Well, there's no standardization of them. There's some recommended templates that some institutions use, but most institutions have their own template. And institutions understand that this financial aid offer letter is in part a marketing document because they haven't already committed. They're still considering it. So you don't want to be brutally honest if the brutal honesty is, yeah, you're actually going to have to pay a lot. And unfortunately, that plays out. It's that sort of the way that human beings work when you're a business and you're trying to keep the lights on, right? Mm-hmm. So for us, we eliminate any loans that's in the award letter that's not the federal loan. And we actually throw out work study because oftentimes when work study is included, doesn't mean there's actually a job there. It just means you're eligible for it. And there's a lot of campuses that have far more students that are eligible for work study than they have jobs. Not to mention the fact that a work study job might conflict with a required course that you need to take to graduate in 4 years. You wouldn't do the work study and then end up going for 5 years. That'd be nuts, right? So to your larger point, the award letters are a mess a lot of times. And a lot of times they have award loan money woven into them. And sometimes they even say it outright that if you accept this loan money, then your out-of-pocket costs are zero. And I'm not sure that's true with a loan. You still got to pay it. You just don't have to pay it now. Mm-hmm. Those are absolutely out-of-pocket costs. So that is another big challenge with the award letters.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So we move on. Mark, thank you so much. Way more to talk about than we have time for today, but certainly appreciate that again. So Mark Salisbury from TuitionFit.org. If you want, as a counselor, you want to sign up for the TuitionFit, what did you call it? The collaborative, the TuitionFit collaborative. You can email mark@tuitionfit.org, and TuitionFit is all one word. Next week, join us with Julie Shields-Retina from MIFA on supporting students and families with FAFSA completion. And next week is going to be our last one for this podcasting season. So thanks for listening, and we look forward to seeing you all next week. And thank you again, Mark, for joining us. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Hope you'll come